On Prime Crime tonight, the dark truth behind an adored family.
This woman suffered this abuse, all the medications, feeding tube.
A shocking crime that changed everything.
Her lungs would have literally been floating in blood.
And the twisted mind of a killer.
He wanted you to clean up blood, right?
Yes, sir.
And he wanted you to clean naked.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and welcome to Prime Crime Tonight. This is where we do a deeper dive into the most high-profile and memorable true crime cases. Tonight, it's about a mother-daughter relationship that's straight out of a horror movie. Claudine, Dee Dee Blanchard, and Gypsy Blanchard. At first glance, they look like a loving mother and daughter. Those who knew them would say Dee Dee relentlessly took care of her young girl, who ever since the age of 8 was suffering from numerous ailments like leukemia and muscular dystrophy. The only problem? It was all a lie.
This woman, Dee Dee Blanchard, she held the ultimate control over Gypsy. To this young girl, Gypsy, she was a monster.
Gypsy was in fact a healthy girl. Evidence would reveal that Dee Dee deliberately fabricated her daughter's medical conditions. She forced Gypsy to be confined to a wheelchair, shaved her head, and sometimes had her take medications that would mimic symptoms of real diseases.
All of the years that Gypsy had suffered through with surgeries that were unnecessary, procedures, this perceived facade that she had to carry on with.
While it's not clear what caused Dee Dee to do this, her own mother was apparently overbearing as well. Family members have indicated a strained relationship between the two, with some suggesting, at the end, Dee Dee may have starved her mother to death. Whatever may be the case, health professionals believe that when it came to Gypsy, Dee Dee may have been showing signs of a mental illness called Munchausen Syndrome by proxy.
A caregiver is intentionally feigning or actually committing some kind of medical or psychological problem on the person that they are supposed to be caring for. Generally, they do this because they appreciate the attention that they get from having someone in their life that needs significant medical or psychological help.
Dee Dee was able to con the public by receiving donations, having the Make-A-Wish Foundation pay for a trip to Disney World, and even allowing Habitat for Humanity to build the two a house in Springfield, Missouri. Despite signs that this was a farce, Dee Dee continually misled doctors and caseworkers.
There certainly has been questions as to whether these doctors should face, the doctors who were involved, who treated her, should face some form of malpractice. This is a failure of the healthcare system. How can a person who is not ill see so many neurologists, oncologists, and other doctors and not be treated?
For the majority of her life, Gypsy didn't know the truth. In fact, her mother convinced her she was younger than she was, going so far as to change the dates on her daughter's birth certificate. But by 19, Gypsy was beginning to peel back the layers and started to act out.
You have to look at Gypsy as being suffering from significant ongoing and long-term abuse. She still tried to rebel. She still tried to engage in teenager kinds of behaviors because she wanted to feel safe and feel free and feel normal.
In 2012, the story takes a turn. She meets a young man from Big Bend, Wisconsin named Nicholas Godejohn on a dating website called ChristianDatingForFree.com and forms a relationship with him.
She's still a developing human being who will have sexual needs and sexual urges. She's still going to want to have the life that she sees in the movies and television shows that she watches.
Although they became girlfriend and boyfriend pretty quickly, it would be years before they actually met in person. They would consummate their love in 2015 by having sex in a movie theater bathroom behind Dee Dee's back. Dee Dee wasn't happy with the relationship.
It didn't go well at all. My mother hated him from the moment they met.
3 months later, Dee Dee Blanchard would be dead. In June 2015, law enforcement enter the Blanchard house and find her massacred corpse, a later autopsy revealing she had been stabbed 17 times.
This all the more horrific is not just the injury of the knife being plunged through her back, but also penetrating the lungs, and she is essentially suffocating to death on her own blood.
Initially, Gypsy is nowhere to be found, but then a clue. Someone using Dee Dee's Facebook account posts graphic and disturbing messages. Investigators track the IP address to Nicholas Godejohn. Once Wisconsin authorities burst into his home, they find Gypsy alive and well. In a shocking twist, Nicholas decides to tell police what happened.
I'll admit it. I did actually stab her. I will admit it.
Do you know how many times you stabbed her?
4.
You stabbed her 4?
Yeah, 4 times.
Okay.
The 4th one, I felt it go into, I think it might have been her lungs.
Okay.
You had an individual that had total and complete dominance. He essentially straddled her, was on her back, and began to plunge this knife into her multiple times.
But did Nicholas act alone? Did he kill Dee Dee and kidnap Gypsy? The story takes a turn again.
Did Gypsy know that you were going to kill her mother?
Honestly, she asked me to.
Okay. So Gypsy knew you were going to do it because Gypsy asked you to.
Yes.
Why did she ask you to do that?
Because she felt it was her only way to be with me.
Okay.
Investigators piece together a fuller picture of the murder. Gypsy wanted her mother dead.
Gypsy doesn't want to be controlled. No human actually wants that. She wants to break free and understands that the only way that she can break free is by her mother no longer being in the picture. So because he sees this person that he loves being abused and being hurt, he's willing to then engage in any kind of behavior that would succeed in that goal of the two of them being together.
Nicholas explains that Gypsy led him into the house, gave him the knife, and stood back as he proceeded to stab Dee Dee to death in the middle of the night.
How she said it?
She pretty much yelped it.
Yelped it?
It's like,
Gypsy! Okay.
yeah, she was loud.
And what did you do when she did that?
It didn't stop me from keep on going.
Okay. You just kept stabbing her?
Yeah.
He just continued to kill her over and over and over again. He wanted to make sure that she was in fact dead. This is what we refer to as overkill.
Nicholas, however, is not like every other suspect. He was diagnosed with autism.
Autism spectrum disorder, one of the hallmarks is this inability to have reciprocal social interactions, meaning everything seems to be kind of just one-sided for him.
Frankly, he seemed like a very reasonable, genuinely nice young man during my interactions with him. Now, his interactions were a little bit odd and stiff initially, particularly, which is very common with the autism spectrum. And Nicholas was very mild in that spectrum.
He also has an extremely low IQ.
He doesn't understand complicated and complex concepts. So just immediately being asked whether or not he did it, yeah, he would immediately confess to the crime. He has no reason not to.
I think Nicholas's confession was done intelligently and voluntarily. There's no evidence of any coercion whatsoever, and he did so voluntarily. So just because he has a certain level of diminished capacity doesn't mean that he is not capable of giving providing a confession that will stand up in a court of law.
This begs the question, was he manipulating Gypsy?
Is she thinking? Does she have the ability to kind of conceptualize in that moment what she has entered into? It's almost like she's entered into a deal with another devil.
Or was she manipulating him?
So it's easy to see how someone could influence him into engaging in some kind of problematic behavior.
I really think she did somewhat set him up in that regard. And I believe she convinced Nicholas that if they did run away together, her mother would always find them and it would always end.
When we come back, we don't just have Nicholas's side of the story, but Gypsy's as well.
Had you discussed alternative methods of killing your mother?
Yes.
What other alternatives had you considered?
Poison, arson, guns.
I truly do worship her to the point there's nothing I want to do for her.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think you've proved that.
Nicholas Godejohn confessed that he murdered Dee Dee Blanchard, the mother of his girlfriend Gypsy Blanchard. He claims Gypsy urged him to do it so that they could be together and she could be free from the woman who had been keeping her hostage for years. As we get further into the case, the details become more frightening and the relationship between the two more complex.
Ultimately, Nicholas and Gypsy are both arrested and charged for Dee Dee Blanchard's murder. At Nicholas's trial, Gypsy would take the stand and testify for the defense.
She very much still has feelings for him, and I certainly could understand why she would want to testify on his behalf. Just her telling her story on the stand for that defendant garnered sympathy for them both. And it also tended to show that the defendant also had emotional and mental issues.
She explained that not only did she help Nicholas, she was the one who pushed him to do it.
Who talked who into killing your mother?
I did. I talked him into it.
Why not just tell somebody rather than kill your mother? Why was that not an option?
I truly didn't believe that nobody would believe me if I told anyone. My mother had legal documents in place saying that I was incompetent.
For Gypsy, it was her perceived key to the freedom that she had so longed to have. She didn't have the ability to create what we view as kind of normalized relationships with anybody.
And what was your mom doing that caused you to be more desperate?
Things were getting physically and more physically abusive. The hitting was more. The starving was more.
And when it came to those alarming Facebook posts from Dee Dee's account, guess who wrote them?
Who made that post?
I did.
Did you make that post pretending to be somebody else?
Yes.
And who were you pretending to be?
Nick.
This is just her wanting to make sure that all of the blame would then be placed on Nicholas.
And why would you make that post claiming to be Nick?
I wanted her to be found. I wanted the cops to find her body.
I've had this happen in a couple of cases where perpetrators have called in cases where they have left a body behind, but yet they don't want the body to essentially decompose and be left all alone.
Yet it was Nicholas who actually killed Dee Dee.
Why didn't you kill your mother?
I didn't believe I could do it.
Gypsy wasn't even in the room.
When you were stabbing Dee in the bed, where was Gypsy at?
She was hiding in the bathroom.
Gypsy hiding in the bathroom is most likely a protective behavior. It's probably the only area in which she was able to be by herself without her mother's influence.
During cross-examination, the state chipped away at this idea that Gypsy was the mastermind.
You mentioned that how the murder was to take place, that was all up to the defendant, correct?
That is correct.
And it was the defendant that told you he wanted to stab your mom.
Correct.
And it was the defendant that told you he wanted a knife.
Yes.
You never told him to stab her 17 separate times, right?
No.
After the murder, it only got worse.
He wanted you to clean naked.
Yes, sir.
Because that kind of turned him on.
Yes, sir.
It's almost as if Gypsy selected someone, maybe, that parallels her mom. Someone that would be willing to control her to this point, that would debase and humiliate her.
So he's pretty much hypersexual. He's got this one person who is engaging in sexual acts and sexual behaviors and sexual conversations with him that he's interpreting as love. And again, having autism spectrum disorder means that he doesn't really understand reciprocity.
Nicholas Godejohn has quite the history. He was arrested in 2013 for allegedly masturbating in a McDonald's and carrying a knife. His apparent sexual proclivities may have played a role here as well. After the killing, he and Gypsy then have sex. Nicholas assures it was consensual.
Obviously, I was the one that was in charge, but she went along with it willingly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what did you guys do when you had sex?
We pretty much did all three things. We did all of them.
Okay.
Gypsy, however, said she only agreed as a way to keep Nicholas from doing something truly disturbing.
When he asked you about raping your mother, you actually talked him out of it, right?
Yes.
And you did so by offering the alternative that he would be able to rape you after the murder, correct?
That's correct.
I wouldn't be surprised if the sexual act was actually consensual on both ends. Again, Nicholas believing that he has earned some kind of reward, and Gypsy just giving in and saying, yes, you have done what I needed you to do. Let me then give you this reward.
They had sex in the context of the dead being present after they had done this. It's almost like some kind of twisted celebration. You're demonstrating ultimate control over the dead, those people that you perceive to do great harm to you in life.
At one point during his interview, Nicholas says that he and Gypsy have alter egos.
The thing is, the good side of me, originally refused to do it.
Okay.
And that's the reason why it was instant that it happened right away.
Okay.
Because my evil side is what actually did it.
Okay.
The one thing he said was, you're dead to me. One thing he said.
Who said?
That part of me said.
Okay.
My evil side of me said.
Okay.
That there's more than one of the sides of each other that is in love with each other. So I got one side of her, his name is Kitty. It's like a little girl inside of her.
Multiple personality disorders or dissociative identity disorder, I don't believe either one of them have that. They needed to keep themselves safe. They needed to put on a mask. They needed to put on some kind of front. So Gypsy needed to pretend herself to be this invalid, disabled individual in front of Dee Dee. And she also needed to accommodate Nicholas's more hypersexual kinds of urges.
For Nicholas, I believe that role playing helped him do things and think through things differently. But wasn't not a psychotic type thing. It was more like when we all, to some degree, say, well, I need to channel the inner Hulk in me to get this difficult job done. In that same regard, Nicholas took on the persona of an evil person in his own mind in order to get the task done.
Despite Nicholas's low IQ and autism, the jury didn't believe that he couldn't appreciate what he did and eventually convicted him of first-degree murder. Nicholas was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
I think that he absolutely knew what he was doing. There's a difference between not knowing what you're doing and making a poor decision. He is criminally liable, but I really feel that he doesn't deserve to spend the rest of his life in jail. He has horrible emotional problems. He needs treatment, and he's not going to receive that behind bars for the remainder of his life.
There was great planning that went into this idea that he traveled a great distance in order to pull this thing off. I've seen those videotapes of him in that interview room. He is fully aware of what is going on.
And even standing at the doorway before the murder, he was discussing in his own mind whether or not to go through with this.
For Gypsy, she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 years in prison.
So one would ask, why would she plead guilty? So a couple of reasons. One, the evidence was very much stacked against her, not to mention to kind of get this over. This trial was likely to be an intense circus and would have brought out a lot of information that probably Gypsy would not have wanted to come out during the trial.
Even though she's locked away, surprisingly, Gypsy appears to be in a much better place than when her mother was alive.
Dee Dee is no longer influential in Gypsy's life. She's not creating medical problems for Gypsy. So despite being complicit, in the death of her mother. Gypsy physically looks better.
Another reason for her to be happy? She's up for parole in 2024.
I think it's quite likely that she would be paroled in 2024 because she is such a sympathetic figure. This woman suffered this abuse, all the medications, feeding tubes, all these things went on, wheelchair bound when she didn't need to be for years. You have to wonder, how is she going to support herself? Who is going to take care of her? She very much will still need care from another adult based on everything that's occurred.
Nicholas killed Dee Dee Blanchard. But what's not clear is who was controlling who in this murder.
You know, who was in the driver's seat, I think will be a question I don't know that will ever necessarily be answered. However, is it possible that he saw this as an opportunity? Yeah, I'll kill your mom. I'll do this for you. But in the end, I'll control you. I'll debase you to the point where you will strip down nude. You will clean up the blood from the floor.
He's falling into a relationship with her that he doesn't have the capacity to understand. They're both influencing one another. But ultimately, it is Gypsy who does the extreme behavior of engaging in conversations that would lead Nicholas to committing this murder as a way of setting them both free.
The Gypsy and Dee Dee Blanchard story is really something hard to believe, even spawning its own television show. Yet the most tragic part of all is people still wonder, who exactly is the victim in all this? Dee Dee, Gypsy, Nicholas, maybe all of them. That's all we have for you on Prime Crime tonight. Leave us your comments on the Blanchard story on Twitter and Facebook with the hashtag PrimeCrimeTonight. As always, thank you for joining us, and until next time, be safe.